Okay, there we are. So for your group projects, you have to be working together. So I've given you this group project discussion board, and I can make that an element of the assignment this week, that you go in, right, to the group discussion, and that you just say hello to each other, right, and get to discussing. Does that sound good?
Yes.
And then we can see, I mean, I don't know who's all still going to be part of our class. Some people may not be coming back, but it's okay if they don't. I mean, it's sad and we hope that they do, but that's why you have your individual pages and then just one group front page with, you know, the lowered expectation. So that way, hopefully, we won't, you know, get caught up with having to rely too much on each other to get our content done. But I will make that, hold on a second. All right, I got that already. Little review, and then add discussion, board requirement, and then I'll send out the email. All right, we're doing it. It's great. Any other questions about the assignment before we start talking about content? No. Good. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to go in here and talk about gunpowder and the rise of absolutism. How are you navigating the content for this week?
I'm not having any trouble doing it. It's all right there on the Moodle page, so.
Yeah, and you know, it's a slow start back. So we are doing a little bit of review, but you know, we are also making some connections this week with the conversations that we've had before. I mean, we've been talking about gunpowder civilizations, right? We talked about the Ottomans, and we talked about what is it, Suleiman, right? But we talked about them as characteristics of individual nation states or empires. You can see the gunpowder slide, right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what I want to do is make those larger connections again to this larger global perspective, because you know, we spent some time in the first half of this class trying to kind of back away from that Eurocentric perspective of world history, right? Giving more emphasis to the East and looking at the ways in which the Middle East and Eastern empires really dominated during the 14th, 15th, and 1600s. And try to frame that and think about that outside of the Western narratives of the rise of the West and superiority of that. But when you start talking about these concepts of like absolutism, does anybody have a definition for absolutism?
Yeah. Absolutism is a term that we have given to a political philosophy that arose, I think it was like beginning in 1400, that emphasized the at least theoretically absolute power of the monarch over the state, and compared to previous systems reduced the importance of non-ruling nobles.
Okay, very good. All right. And just to take what Will said there, you know, it's a 1400, 1500 century or 15th century, 16th century concept about monarchies, right? In this European construct, where we see before this period of time a dissemination of power through regional occupation of nobles, you know, paying people the serfdom, and you know, maintaining small armies. Then we start to see these power structures begin to centralize around an actual crown, an actual monarch. And so when we talk about absolutism, and when you read and you look at absolutism, it's largely thought of as a Western phenomenon because of that Eurocentrism. It took me a long time to find a video that talked about absolutism from a world perspective. It's hard to find, right? And that made me think about the curiosity of again, this Eurocentric concepts. Because in reality, the definition of absolutism, if we just take away one part, which is the idea of a monarchy, right? And put instead a centralized power, it becomes a much broader concept, right? And so the gunpowder empires, and even the earlier, like at the same time, the Ming Dynasty, these are all could be considered absolutisms, right? So why is it that we don't look at it that way? And that's your discussion question for this week. And the reason that I have that as your discussion question is because we've been going over this content for quite some time. And now, as we look now at the way that the power structure shifts, right, we can go back and consider what we've learned and think about these different lenses. So the gunpowder empires, first off, if you haven't gotten through the Khan Academy video yet, at the end of that, the narrator makes the point that the concept of gunpowder empires is no longer a very popular term. Does anybody know why? It's okay, because the definition of the gunpowder empires is that these empires, these three, right, only really came to power, the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal, because, and Will, feel free to correct my pronunciation. I would miss if you didn't. But of these three empires, right, the idea is that they were only successful. They could only have come to power because of the gunpowder.
Well, I mean, it obviously isn't just the gunpowder. The Ottomans, especially, I think, the Ottomans had favorable scenario, a favorable mindset, and the way the empire itself was structured was really conducive to the vast expansion and kind of like construction of a power base that they did.
Sure, and could we not also then call the Spanish a gunpowder empire?
Well, I mean, if we're talking like the classical definition of gunpowder empire, like in the sense that, oh, they could only done this because of gunpowder, maybe. I mean, like,
Would the Spanish, if they had not engaged in maritime exploration, come to the Americas, right, and utilize the resources of people and land, would they have been as strong as an empire as they gained, as the power that they gained?
No.
Could they have done that without gunpowder?
Yeah, I think both. Like, I guess I just feel like gunpowder gets, a really big reputation without inherently deserving it. And so I guess it's like something where the Ottomans were already successful for centuries before they, incorporated gunpowder into their military combat style. I mean, yeah.
That's my whole point, right? And that's it. Well, that's it, David, right? It's just that when we say these kind of terms, we're still talking about a Eurocentric narrative, right? These Western empires or these Eastern empires were not the same, when it comes to superiority as the Western, because it was this one invention that affords them this, privilege and position. And so it's just making sure that we're framing things in ways that's equitable. You've got these different groups here. We've talked about the Ottomans and the Safavids and the Mughals. Well, we're going into it. But beyond just the gunpowder, you've got the technology that comes from it, the big cannons, right? These larger guns. That technology comes from this dissemination of cultural exchange. And as we understand, we've been talking about one of our commonalities, throughout our conversations has been the fact that when you have cultural exchange, you have a flourishing of understanding, you have advancements, right? And so what we see through these Islamic nations, or empires rather, is this kind of cultural power structure. Will?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment because I thought maybe some other people didn't notice it. Abby said something quite interesting in the chat.
I missed Abby's chat. I can't see it.
I'll read it then. She said, it's almost shifting the European use of gunpowder to a higher level, like they are better than the weapons they use, whereas the gunpowder empires, she puts in quotes, might be deemed as brutish because their names hint to violence. That's a good point. When you call it a gunpowder empire, you're really, that really does strongly imply the use of violence in the formation or expansion of that nation. So I think that's a good thing. I just wanted to make sure nobody missed that.
Abby, that's a really good point, right? But that's also part of that understanding of who is civilized and who is not, right? All of those connotations, those implied and explicit messages, they're all part of it. The Columbian Exchange, right? Gunpowder empires. But for the gunpowder and the technological advancements that come out of these three empires, the Western, European countries would not have had the technology to be able to dominate when our roads and exchange goes from across land to water. So, we're ignoring a lot here when we say that. And when we talk about absolutism as just a European concept, right, of formal, centralized, strong government, right, we're ignoring the fact that for 2 or 3 centuries prior, we have that same centralized, organized government where you have a Renaissance that plays out. We're ignoring all of that. And so we want to make sure that we're framing this right. So yeah, you've got these empires, they have some commonalities, definitely they have their differences, but you can't get anywhere without a strong army and this advanced technology. So yeah, we see the rise of this because these empires are more involved also in local community. So one of the characteristics they share is that there's a great stability here, a greater stability than we see prior to that. And part of the reason is that we have these areas around, right, where you have like these migratory groups. We know about the Mongols up here, but there's other groups of people who aren't as organized or as large that are still disruptive on the edges of our centralized powers here. But between the 14th and the 16th century, we see those areas beginning to become permanent settlements as well. So largely, we talked very briefly at the beginning of the term about how human civilization evolves. We're migratory, and then we begin to settle down, and we become more about agriculture and domestication. And so places like the Ukraine here in this area, it's only at this period of time, or in the 1500s, that we see this shifting from herders and nomadic peoples to more peasants and landlords as that peonage system, right, from Europe kind of comes in and plays up and through here as well. So, this is all a connection here. But because of that centralization of agriculture, we see those borders becoming more stable. And so we also have the organization of strong armies, right? Each of these groups has strong armies. And if you have strong armies, it's because you've reorganized your society around that. And the rulers that did a good job at that, they were able to, maintain, but those who didn't, they lost control. So, thinking about that, one of the characteristics that's shared here are these strong armies. What do you need right, to support a large army in a country?
You need large population of people who are able to fight, which in these times was generally young men.
Mm-hmm.
You need the ability to feed. Actually, no, I'm going to expand this point. You need the ability to support this army logistically. You need smiths for its weapons and armor, um, animal husbandry for its horses and oxen, logistics and bureaucrats to handle delivering supplies to wherever this army may be.
Right.
This is, yeah.
I would say for militaristic society, you have physical supplies that were just noted, but you also need a reason to believe in, because you have, say, during World War II, when the United States went into full production mode, people had a reason to believe in. But now we're a bit more settled down on and pushed into a more liberal view, which has gotten people a bit scared of going into this mass militaristic society that we once were.
And actually, if you're talking about World War II and the reason, the United States didn't even want to get involved with World War II until Japan attacked us in the Pacific at Pearl Harbor. So if you're talking about a reason, like, there needs to be, I think two of the biggest things that generally compel armies or have in the past are, number one is expansionism, which is the obvious if we're talking about empires. And number two is the idea of an external threat. But I think that with the gunpowder empires, there definitely was more to push with, like, expansion and glory. And it's saying my internet connection is unstable, so I think
you're kind of cutting in and out, but I think that Chris and Will are both right. You have to have something to believe in. In World War II, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, right? That creates that kind of uniformity of like the American consciousness. And we don't really see that right now. We're not centralized heavily. And think about just with the coronavirus, right? Are you concerned more about what the federal government's doing right now or the governor when it comes to the impact to your lives directly right now?
The governor.
Right. When you see like New York struggling to get ventilators and you see Massachusetts struggling to get ventilators, which one are you more concerned with?
Massachusetts.
New York.
Yeah, well, humanitarian wise, yes. But when it comes to you personally, it's the state, right? And so we still have that kind of separation by those identities. Now, we'll see what happens. But when you have a federal system as we have right now, where we've had such divisive tones for several years, that whole uniformity of consciousness begins to deteriorate. And it's not just under the Trump administration. This is happening under the Obama administration as well, because that's where we see this like major contention, right? This modern period really emerging. And so, it's a really good example of the decentralization of that. But yeah, you have to have that strong centralized understanding. And these absolute leaders, it was not about whether or not everyone got on board. It was you follow or you get the hell out of the way. Now, Akbar was a little bit different, because Akbar and the Mughal Empire, that was an Islamic centralized government, but largely it was a Hindu population. And so what does Akbar do? Akbar is going to actually stop taxing non-Muslims and bring them into the fold and give them good jobs, why would you do that?
It creates less strife going forwards, and
That's right.
promotes unity.
The buy-in, right? In that kind of situation, you have to have the buy-in. So, we look at these different groups individually here. You've got a Sunni Islam state in the Ottoman, right? Turkish. You've got that Janissary system. Do you remember the Janissary system?
Mm-hmm.
How's Abby doing? Can someone tell me what she's saying? Because I can't see if she's saying anything.
She hasn't. She said she also brought up faith in the rulership as motivation for an army, but she hasn't said anything.
Okay,
since that.
just making sure I'm not missing her. So what was the Janissary system?
It's where the Ottoman Empire would take usually Christian children away from their families and raise them as soldiers for the empire.
That's right.
Yeah, to create an army that was specifically loyal to the Sultan and not to any prince or other noble somewhere in Ottoman lands who may not be reliable should the person who's actually in control of them say, no, I don't want to send my troops to go fight there.
Absolutism, requires that you shut down any dissenting voices, right? And you have people around you that are loyal to you, or if you're not sure they can be, you keep them under your thumb. And so, again, this idea of absolutism is not just a European concept. In the Safavid group here, we know they had ghulams, and then this is very closely representative, or it's very similar to the Janissary system, where young enslaved people, right, or men, would be taken into the military, right? And they would become part of an elite army as well. And they could acquire a lot of wealth. So that right there is going to create a large buy-in and perpetuate loyalty, right? And so why would you give enslaved men so much power, right? That loyalty, you want to make sure that these bordering groups around your country aren't gaining a dissenting voice in your government. And when you take children out of their cultures, you do two things. You break up the culture that you're opposing. And if you get young boys, or people, any men and women, but if you get, children young enough, you take them out of their culture, right? Then they're not learning that culture. They're learning what you're telling them to learn. And so you're creating loyalty that way. I was looking at the Janissary system, and another point I want to make here about it is it's not like someone was stolen from their home and they were just like, yay, right, this is fine. These systems were violent, and discipline was very strict for a young age, and punishments were very harsh as well. So what is it said here? It said that the Janissaries, 40 were led by a single hair, right? Just that kind of loyalty and conformity as well. But that conformity is part of this larger centralization that's going on. To be an absolute ruler, you have your hands in everything. Politics, social issues, right? Everything. And so it's good if you're organizing and creating a uniform government in some ways, because hey, we all want uniform law, right? And when you do this, usually we'll see at least the elites will gain access to higher ed or to educational opportunities. Not that I'm a fan of elite privilege, but when you give that kind of privilege out, you're going to get loyalty as well. And if you're educating, you can educate them with the messages that you want them to learn, right? And if you're getting a free education, that's what you're going to learn. So the Mughals here, there was a little break of time, but this is basically the empire here. And for the Western narrative to ignore these empires or to downplay them. Keep in mind that the Ottoman and the Mughals go into the modern era, especially the Persians, right? So, I mean, long-lived cultures. But like I said, the Sunni Islam here was ruling largely over a Hindu population. And so we'll see a different approach here by Akbar, that religious tolerance that he brings. Later leaders, as the dictates of Islam begin to kind of change and different leadership also plays a part in that, we'll see less of these rights. But what brings this group together is that largely universal voice at the beginning. And then the Mughal architecture, and I meant to put a slide in here, and I'm so sorry I didn't, but the Taj Mahal, right? We talk about how under the Ottoman Empire, we see this Western and Eastern culture. Here, we see Hindu and Islamic designs. And if you're trying to bring together, right, and trying to get the loyalty and gain the loyalty of your Hindu subjects, of course, you're going to integrate their cultural pictures and their cultural norms into your architecture. That's the physical infrastructure that houses government. Of course you're going to do that, and you're going to bring a mixture to show that this is a unique culture that is shared by everyone. That's how you get buy-in. Makes sense, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we see that, yeah, these are centralized governments that gained a lot of power through gunpowder, but, you know, what empires outside of that, even today, would be successful without that? And they were the strongest and most lasting. And again, that the concept of gunpowder is not a totally popular idea today. One of the things that I want to stress that differentiates the Islamic absolutists from the European absolutists is that in the Muslim world, Islam still reigned. There wasn't really a challenge there. There was an integration of it, a shared concept, right? So because all were fairly new at the 16th century as well, because these three come up at the same time, they have like a uniform almost, you know, pressure that's put in. And because they act almost simultaneously, they're able to dominate as well. So timing is important, location is important, because, you know, the maritime exploration is going to kick off, but when these three empires begin to build, we're still seeing a reliance largely on that Silk Road. And it's when that Silk Road shifts that we see the power dynamic shift. I was researching this idea of European dominance and the concept of Europe being, you know, the pinnacle of you know, superiority. And I came across an article by Dr. Muhlenberger, and he says, that is a common assumption that however important Islamic societies were in the Middle Ages, in modern times, Western Europe left Islam behind. And you've heard that before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Different people have different ideas of what modernism means. But if modernism means gunpowder revolution, then that's really an incorrect concept. So again, how are we defining, you know, modern era? And that's not to say that when the technology allows and affords Europeans, Western Europeans, to begin their explorations, that they don't become a dominant force. Absolutely, right? But let me just emphasize Dar Islam here, that, you know, for centuries, Islam was the center of the Western or the Eastern and European world, right? And represented the innovation and culture of the entire hemisphere. So why do you think it is that in our European constructs, we haven't given that kind of credit really to the East and to the Middle East?
Because they want to take the credit?
Yeah, I mean, if all things derive from Greece and Rome in the antiquities.
Maybe it's some because I know that like also around this time, or okay, I don't know, but like with absolutism, did it maybe have something to do with like the divine right of kings or whatnot?
The divine right
Like,
of leadership.
yeah,
Right. So you could also talk about the mandate of heaven there, right? This
yeah,
divine leadership, which is like the the European monarchical justification for absolutism, right? That God has, you're the chosen person, your bloodline, you were born in this family. David is our king because God has sanctioned his bloodline to be so, right? Well, there's other concepts that were Eastern that said those who are best prepared to lead will lead. And if you're leading, Liz, right? If Liz is our leader, it's because she has the support of God. But if Chris comes up and takes over Liz's territory, obviously she lost favor with God, right? What is the difference there? David, you were going to say something a minute ago.
I mean, I guess I'm just like going back to the like in high school, we always learned multiple times that absolutism started in Spain with Charles the whatever second, fourth, I don't know, whoever was in charge when Spain started colonizing the New World.
Ferdinand?
No, it was one of the Charleses. So a few generations later, when it really got into gear, they were bringing all the silver back every year. And I guess it's one of those things where it's just like absolutism, is seen as a big shift away from feudalism, but other places didn't have feudalism in the first place, so they didn't need to have this shift from feudalism into a centralized government, because places like China were always centralized in the beginning, shifts, but always a degree of centralization. And so it's one of those things where it's just like, okay, just because it was special for you doesn't mean it didn't exist everywhere else, in its own type. And then it just reminds me of the whole thing I wrote on, basically like half the answers I wrote on the midterm we did this year, or last week, because I think a lot of what I wrote was basically just repeating this over and over again of colonialism means you need to say why you're better than everyone else, whether or not it's true.
Right. And to kind of flesh it out a little bit more for you, Liz, if our narrative is, Western, then there was this dark age, right? It wasn't our fault. It was the Black Plague. And even during that period, there was a renaissance coming, right? Of rediscovering this information and rediscovering this art and these philosophies that were being housed in the East, but we ignore all of that. And of course, if absolutism does not come to the West until the 15, 16, 1700s, then it didn't exist before then. But it did, Do you think, do you think that the way that we've been taught to think about these things, right? The elitism of one group, do you think it still plays out in our society today?
It definitely does.
I feel like why would they teach us in such a way if there wasn't a point to teach us that way? I feel like they teach us that way to be able, I don't know, maybe to be blind to some things that's happening in the world of the elites around us today.
I'm always struck whenever someone talks about like the president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world. You've heard that before, right?
Yep.
And I'm always kind of like struck when I hear that. I'm like, that's ignoring a whole bunch of other people, and the coronavirus again is a good example of how interconnected we are. I mean, it pops off in China. When? How long ago was that?
December.
Yeah, beginning of December. No, December 20th-ish last year.
And this is April 1st?
Mm-hmm.
Is it April 1st?
Yep.
It is, yes.
And so it took 3 months for us all to be, oh, I'm sorry, 2 months, 1 week from that, for us to be sheltered in place almost
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, back at that 2 weeks ago, I was amazed at how rapidly the situation had deteriorated in just 10 days. And yeah, and
Hey,
it's
y'all,
not
control is an
getting better.
illusion. Control is an illusion. Buy your groceries and hunker down, right? So, you know, I think it's just important for us to be mindful of the arrogance that goes along with that idea and that notion of elitism. So, obviously, the major veins of communication after the 1600s, right, or by the 1600s, has shifted from across this continent to these waterways. And because of the location of Western Europe and their policies and practices of dominating, you know, indigenous peoples, we're going to see this shift to European control. But there's something else that's important when we think about why it is that Europe dominates completely as it does in this era, and that's because of the printing press, right? Abby and I talked about this a little bit, but the printing press, and we've talked about this, by the time that Cortez goes into the Aztec Empire, right, he's been able to read everything that Columbus has written about how to actually dominate. Those are ideas that are being exchanged and recorded and shared and disseminated at large. And this is a really important aspect and characteristic of European dominance. It comes out of Germany, it's developed, it's focused on. We do see a printing press in Constantinople, but remember, Constantinople is this place where you have both, right, Eastern and Western culture coming together. So the printing press was used largely just to disseminate Christian literature, but the Islamic texts forbade the use of the printing press. What is the impact on that, on us, or on a civilization, or on a group? Think about it. The West is printing, and the Middle East and these empires are not. What's the
Well,
impact here?
when you're talking about absolutism, it's like going back to that and saying, well, if it's not in text, it never happened.
It's not in text, it never happened. The adherence to Islamic law, right, is a major characteristic of Muslim absolutism. So the adherence to that means that this experience that humans are having in these explorations is not being shared with the Islamic world, right? I mean, think about our time together. We've been talking abstractly. We've been talking, I mean, you come into a class for 4 months and it's like, let's talk about the entire history of the world, you know? You can't do it. Yeah, I don't think, you know, maybe, I'm sure there's someone out there who's a much better educator than I am. You're getting your money's worth, I think, but you know what I'm saying, like someone who can synthesize all of it. But we have been, Chris is like, yeah, I know there are. No, but listen, what I'm saying is that we've come together and you've learned some skill sets in here, right? You've learned some ideas, I hope, that are going to help you navigate as you move forward. You're taking something from this. But it's because we have this printed information. We have these ways of communicating besides just verbally, and we can share this information together. That's an important aspect of all of this. And so that's part of what's going to bring, you know, an end to the dominance of these gunpowder empires. And remember what's going on in China. They've just closed down completely, right? They're like, we are so much more advanced. We don't even need you. We don't want to mess with these Portuguese coming over here, trying to enslave us and force us into Christianity. So all that's being cut out as these Europeans are going out and they're dominating and they're writing these stories, Liz, right? Abby, they're writing these stories. They're writing the stories in their narrative. And we are several hundred years out, but we're of that culture. So it's no surprise. And we apply those same constructs as us versus them, right? We are the dominant, we are the superior, and they are the inferior. And we apply it in our own country to our own neighbors. I went out this morning early to take my dog to the doggy run, right? This place down here. And there's this guy, and we're friendly. We were talking about coronavirus. We're separated by about 10, 15 feet. So we're kind of hollering at each other. I'm already hollering. And then, he brings up Trump and he brings up, Hillary. And I just kind of lost my mind. I'm like, what the hell are you even talking about, man? I'm just trying to hunker down. Why are you going, and the reason that we weren't on top of it was because of the impeachment. And immediately, just like that, I get angry and I'm screaming at him, right? Not like crazy screaming, but just like, ah! And I had to catch myself. And I'm like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Right? That's my neighbor. That's my friend. We've never agreed on politics. I had to do the little heart thing at him because, you can't hug right now. So it was like heart, and I got a heart back. But I've been born in this idea of the us versus them. And even though I struggle with it and I teach that we have to get past it, I'm trying to live the truth that I'm trying to share with you. But even, there's moments just like that, I turn. That's part of what we've learned as well. So absolutism, you see my little picture here? I found this, I like this one, right? What do we have? If we broaden the definition, right? The seat or head of government holding absolute control, then it's no longer a Western concept. It's a universal. And we can see past, right? This one lens. Man, next time I see him out there at the dog run, I'm going to be thinking about those larger ways that we can define things to be more inclusive. Because when we only look at things from one direction, we forget all of these other people, not Western, right, that we share commonalities with. What time is it? This is very emotional right now, right? Are y'all having emotional moments too, or am I the only person screaming at people? Is it just me?
I'm not around enough people to be getting emotional with, but yeah.
There were a bunch
It's
of
it's very
animals in the
easy
same
right now
room.
to take out frustrations on other people, I've
Mhm.
noticed.
Yeah. What were you saying, Will?
I just made a remark about how when I sat down here, there were a bunch of animals in the room with me, and they've all gone somewhere else in the house. But more on topic, like about frustration with other people. Like yesterday, my brother got mad at like everyone over like a little misunderstanding regarding a slice of cake. Like these are really kind of high-strung times.
Yeah, they are. And most of us in this room aren't even navigating children like Liz is. So that's got to be,
Yeah.
another layer of like, can't freak out on a 6-year-old, so.
Yeah, it's really hard because it's like I forget that because she's 6, so she don't really understand the feelings she's having. She don't talk about them feelings, so it's like I always have to remind myself like she's going through the exact same thing that I'm going through. Like she's missing school, she's missing her friends, she's missing her home and her bed, and so I just have to like keep reminding myself like she might not be saying it, but she's going through exactly what everyone else is.
Yeah. Stressful times. But I think that there's still some really interesting ways to apply what we're learning here to our circumstances and our situations. And also, be forgiving of ourselves as well. That's important. So what time is it? We got a few more minutes. Let me go through some more slides with you. So just showing you kind of the commonalities here. We talked about Suleiman, remember? The Great. We liked him a lot. You know, an empire expansionist, yes, but he also uniformed law, criminal law, you know, was able to retain power under the laws of Islam, created free education for at least Muslim men. And this is much earlier than we see in the Christian state. But of course, it is still just for some people, right? And elite people as well. So don't forget about that. Don't overlook that part. Akbar, you know, develops that strong economy, patron of the cultures, the culture, religious tolerance. We talked about that, supported education as well, right? But again, all the education we're talking about is going to come through a lens. And that's going to be one of creating, you know, loyalty and fealty. So if we look at Peter the Great, we just talked about him for a moment, but this was a leader that was known for centralizing government. And one thing that he does in Russia that is different than we see in the southern gunpowder empires is that he embraces the culture that's coming out of the West, right? He's trying to modernize based upon what he sees as the newly emerging dominant culture. And so he creates a meritocracy, education elites, but interestingly, he adopts the Western customs of gender integration. So elite women he outlaws elite women veiling themselves, right? And he brings them into the court. So that's a way to bring in, you know, certain loyalties from women as well. And also beginning to identify with these European groups. But that large army and navy is important. And then we have, you know, our, what you would call traditional from a European perspective, but why is it traditional, right? King Louis the 14th, who I don't know, I just find him fascinating. But yeah, he up and moved the seat of government from Paris to Versailles, right, out into the country. Do you know why he did that?
So we could be further away from the you know, general populace, so they would have less control over him.
And he brought everybody with him, though, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
He brought he required the majority of the noble families to move out and move into this huge house, right? This huge palace. Chris, you know why he would do that? Oh, can't hear you. You're on mute.
If he moved out, but the rest of the government stayed, that's usually that calls for a new version of government uprising.
Yeah, if I'm not here watching all of you, then you're going to be talking behind my back. Yeah, right? I'm not going to have that.
Yeah, if he brings the nobility with him, it legitimizes him, or at least preserves his legitimacy. If he just ups and goes to Versailles and is just by himself there saying, oh, this is the capital now, guys, people can just be like, you know, capital's Paris. It's always been Paris.
I mean,
Right, and we're all in Paris.
Hostages.
What's that, David?
It's basically a hostage situation, you know, a little bit more polite, but it's, you know, very much like a, oh, you're on my land now, not where you have your friends back home, you know, you're on my territory sort of thing.
And there's like all of these like elaborate court rituals, right? Where everyone has to come together. He's the center of government. You have to come to him. Everything has to go through him. And then, of course, we also have just like the pomp and circumstance. You see the Hall of Mirrors before. The Sun King, he called himself the Sun King, which in that, right, is, you know, some clear messaging there. But he would don all of these gold and these jewels. And then when the sun would strike, he would walk through this hall so that that emanated off of him, all of this brightness. I mean, I would like to see that. I don't know about y'all. I don't want to live through it, but I mean, that would have been something to see, right? So, we have, stop sharing that. There we go. Ah, look. Oh, and there she is. There's Abby. So we have, the French aristocracy was just something else. Yeah, definitely, something else for sure. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say about that. We're moving into a more modern era with our conversations on revolutions next week. We go into the 1700s, but I wanted to kind of make that connection and bridge before we did so that we can really emphasize once again, the importance of the Muslim world in world history, especially prior to maritime exploration. What are your thoughts? I think we had a pretty good conversation for Zoom.
I'm really happy because I had a class yesterday and we did it in Google Meet and it was an absolute nightmare. So I am so happy that you're using Zoom for this class. It makes it so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you think Zoom's better, right?
Oh, by far. Google Meets was absolutely terrible. Terrible.
Yeah, I heard it's a hot mess, and I had to pay a little bit, but peace of mind is worth it, man. I can't be doing all this.
I thought Zoom made it free for universities.
Hold on, Riley. I'm almost
I
done.
thought Zoom made it free for universities.
Yeah, for 40 minutes.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So imagine if in the middle of 40 minutes in, we got kicked out,
Yeah.
It's chaos, so.
Yeah. No, I have an ASL class, American Sign Language, and we were using Google Meets yesterday, and it's not the best solution for a thing where there's, no audio.
Right. Oh, dear.
So
It's not like we had a lot of time to prepare, it's like, what does it look like when we had to transition online? But I feel very fortunate that, my content, transfers easier than some.
Yeah.
So, sign language, poor thing.
I told her about Zoom at the end of the class. She said she'd take a look at it. So hopefully that'll work out.
Yeah, you talk to her again, you could tell her to, reach out to me. I'll be happy to. Or you could also tell her, if you talk to her again, that Claire the librarian could help her with Zoom. And that's one of her buddies, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and Claire took her class, and she seems pretty proficient in sign language, so that might be more helpful than me. I'll be like, I don't know.
Go write on a piece of paper.
Yeah. All right, well, my babies, we made it through another class. Did a great job. And so we'll meet again on Wednesday of next week at 10, right? Start working on your discussion postings. Make sure you go into the wiki and just play with it a little bit before the end of the week so you can get that done. And then I have extended office hours on Friday. I have my office hours tomorrow as well. And that being said, do you have any other questions for me?
When you say for the week 10 discussion, you must also post at least 2 additional responses. What do you mean by that?
So you can earn up to 40 points in the discussion, right?
Okay.
And your initial response, where you're actually directly responding to the discussion prompt, you can earn up to 20 points for that. And then every other post is a response to somebody else, right? And each one of those can earn you up to 10 points, up to 40 points.
Okay.
But if I was to go in and just be like, David, what a great thought you had. Have a great day, right? That's not going to get me 10 points. It's going to get me 2 or 3 points, right? So make sure that you are, putting in substantive work. I mean, definitely support each other and make those kind of comments, but make sure you're also promoting the conversation. So you've got to post on at least 2 separate occasions. So you post today, right? And then all you got to do is post one more day by Sunday and post at least twice. But I would encourage you the first time that we're discussing to try to post more than just the bare minimum, just so you can see how the grading's gonna go. And I'll grade loosely, but you know, do what you
Okay.
can, and I'll get in there and do what I can, and we'll do as we are. All right,
Good.
no other questions? Well, it's so wonderful to see you all. It really just warms my spirit and lifts me up a little bit. So, you know, I want you to continue to be safe. Abby, I hope you feel better. And
Absolutely.
as you all know, I care about you. I want you to make good choices. Try to be kind to each other. Do as I say, not as I do today. But, you know, wash your hands. Social distance.
How far into the essay do you want us to be?
Huh?
How far into the essay do you want us to be?
At this point, you should be organizing, you know, your thoughts on what the question is and doing your research.
Okay.
And that's why we're having our meetings last week, this
Yeah.
week, and next week. It's pushing into next week so that I can make sure that, you know, you're on track with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we go, does anyone want to meet my dog?
Love to meet your dog.
Rosie. Rosie.
No, she's not coming.
Yeah, Rosie's not in the mood.
Oh my. Here, hang on.
Well, you
meet
can
me-
bring her in next time.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
my
leave
cat said
Rosie
he would
alone.
be-
Rosie's doing her
Alright.
thing. But yeah, give her a treat next time.
All right.
All right, y'all. You have a great day. All right.
Thank you. Have a good rest
Yeah.
of the night.
See ya.
Bye, everybody. Be safe.
Not really.
Bye.
Aw.
But
Thank you.
See you next Wednesday. Aw.